Hey, what's going on, everybody? Rob Satch from Feedback Ranch. You know, one of the subjects that keeps coming up because I'm an entrepreneur and I work with small businesses is the idea of healthcare. And yesterday I had a friend on my Facebook page talk about how he has investigated into the healthcare situation, and he is a conservative-leaning person. Now, I am conservative, but I would say I'm liberty-minded, liberty-focused. I think there's a whole series of things that I could go down and say I think are problematic with even the conservative standpoint, but I'm certainly not a socialist. I'm certainly not a liberal in terms of central planning, bureaucracy, and growing government of bureaucrats. With healthcare, this guy was talking about how healthcare is a unique situation and that unlike any other industry, it requires a good central, basically socialized system, and that conservatives and liberty thinking people are wrong when they say that a free market solution would get us, that would fix the healthcare crisis. I immediately started to think about how I totally disagree. Here's the 3-point reason. First off, all things come down to supply and demand curves. Anything. The more supply there is, the lower the cost. The higher the demand is, the higher the cost. The lower the demand, where that equilibrium between supply and demand meet, is where prices are made. When you subsidize demand, which is the buyer of something, with extra money, such as Medicare and Medicaid, and even large insurance payments, you create a false inflation. You create inflation. You create false buying power on your demand, and your demand will gobble up supply at an artificial rate, therefore causing inflation and increasing prices with no increase in outputs. There's no more healthcare going on. When, on the other side, so that's how when you mess with demand by giving them funny money through Medicare, Medicaid, and using insurance money rather than their own dollars, so there's not a true value and cost commercial transaction occurring, you create inflation on the demand side. Now on the supply side, supply is how much healthcare do we have? How many doctors do we have? How much medicine do we have? How many solutions to problems do we have? When you create licensure laws and any impedance to the increase in production, when you make it harder for doctors to become doctors, when you make it harder for people to do the work of healthcare, you increase costs because you keep out new entrants, you stifle innovation, and you just simply impede people entering the market to solve the solution. If you don't believe me, I want you to go out there right now and try and get healthcare. What do I mean by this? You can prove my point by saying, go out and find someone to help you with something that's wrong. You will find that the only solutions you can get are those that are behind heavy licensure laws. Those licensure laws for doctors, nurses, and medical practitioners are behind high cost, subsidized higher education. We have made it impossible for people to simply provide healthcare services besides the impedance to new supply or new doctors or nurses with licensure laws and requirements, and the increasing in costs of higher education required to study for that and to get there. We also make it burdensome and risky for people to be in the business of healthcare because there's no reduction in tort law. If you screw up, you will get sued to the tilt. Besides that, we have a destruction of the actual business model or the actual operations of the corporations because there are truly only 4 to 7 core customers. We are not customers of healthcare at the moment. Medicare and Medicaid are the 2 biggest customers, or 2 of the largest, most powerful. Every hospital and healthcare provider is being shook down right now by Medicare and Medicaid. The reimbursements are tragically off and wrong in healthcare, and we are seeing at the current moment in November of 2019 a massive amount of layoffs in healthcare because in order to pay for the Affordable Care Act, we have basically a horizoning or an ending of reimbursement programs for certain types of Medicare payments is what it is. Now, when you have limited, so you have Medicare and Medicaid, the two biggest or two of the biggest customers who decide what they're going to pay and if a health service is worth it. Then you have the next set would be the big insurance companies who are cronies. We have crony capitalism. Now, these cronies, what they have done is created laws that reduce the ability of production or supply to increase. It is nearly impossible to create a new insurance platform. It is nearly impossible to get in the business of providing health insurance. Besides that, they are enjoying how we all use our insurance to pay for everything. There's no reason why a trip to get stitches should come out of insurance. If it came out of our pocket, we would demand a fair price, we would shop around, and prices would be controlled. But because we have gotten into a situation where all healthcare providers and all of us as consumers tend to use our insurance, prices have skyrocketed, but that's also tied to supply. So, therefore, licensure laws, subsidies for higher education, a increase in the rigor of accreditation of schools and medical schools, all barriers to healthcare, all barriers to new insurance, all cripplers of competition, which are abundant, are crippling the ability for more insurance providers, more healthcare providers, more nurses. Then you have drug costs. Drug costs are experiencing the same thing that healthcare is, but in an amplified way. The risks are higher, the payoffs are higher, the costs are higher, and the margins can be higher. Therefore, all we have is an amplification of the inflationary systems in the actual medications. Therefore, the solution to get a true healthcare reform has to address and make it their goal to allow an increase in supply by reducing red tape, bureaucracy, licensure laws, and all things that get in the way of producing more healthcare. Increasing supply, creating more competition, creating more entrants. On the other side, we must eliminate or drastically reduce our dependence on insurance companies for everyday procedures, A. B, we must increase the competition between insurance companies and healthcare providers. And C, we must, absolutely must, just reduce laws and make it so that more people can get in the business of this. Ultimately, when that happens, we will see more people get in the realm of healthcare. They will get into it quicker. And we have to make it our goal to have three outcomes in healthcare. One, we want the highest quality, Ben Shapiro talks about this, we need the highest quality healthcare to the most amount of people for the lowest cost. And when you say that you have the requirements of quality, cost, and abundance, those three things together can only happen in a free enterprise system with true supply competing to meet the demand, and demand actually calculating the costs in proportion to what it takes to create the income that they pay. So long story short, until we buy healthcare like we do something at a restaurant, when you go, do I want the steak? Or actually, and here's the final thing, it's most like, if we go to single payer, it's essentially like doing a fully furnished bar at a wedding. When you pay for a bar rather than having cash bar, that means that all of your guests to your weddings can go there and they can drink as much as they want. Another way would say it, it's like an all-you-can-eat buffet. When you go to the all-you-can-eat buffet at Mystic Lake Casino down here, you'll see that when people take a plate of food, they'll take more than what they need. They'll take items that they may not necessarily want, and there's no true skin in the game to say, am I willing to pay for this item and will I utilize it 100%? Because, well, it's all included. So the result is you have waste, tons and tons of waste. and you take stuff you don't need, and what happens is all things at the buffet become lower quality, and they all kind of shoot towards the middle. Now, if you compare that with when you go to a sit-down restaurant and you choose from a menu, you will demand that what you buy is of high quality. If it's not, you paid the money for it, and you will demand that my chicken dish be up to par with a chicken dish, or I'll request a refund. Not only that, you will have a tendency to eat your entire meal and weigh carefully the costs associated with the satisfaction or enjoyment or calorie input or whatever it is. Okay? So we can extrapolate that directly to healthcare. It may sound cruel, but when people don't use their own money with their own best interests to consider the costs for everyday things in healthcare, which we know people are going to have babies, you know you're going to have some accidents, you know you're going to need stitches, you know you're going to break arms, right? Our everyday regular healthcare is one thing. Now so in order to get there, it needs to be like a sit-down restaurant where you use your money at the restaurant in order to buy the food that you are going to eat. If you don't do that, you break the supply and demand system, which is what we have. Every sector that has a broken supply and demand system, you see a runaway inflation. And here's where it is. College, higher education, daycare. You have it a little bit in food, a little bit in housing, but primarily higher education, healthcare services, health insurance. Everywhere where there's funny money, Medicare and Medicaid, you have a giant disaster when it comes to just basic it creates inflation. And what does inflation mean? It means that you have to pay more than what it's actually worth in comparison to other things. I could buy 200 televisions, or I could have my wife give birth, right? So to end this whole thought, we are nowhere close to free market enterprise. We haven't been as close to pure free market enterprise in decades. The closer we get to free enterprise systems in healthcare, the more freedom we will have. We will have higher quality at lower cost to the most amount of people. We will have an increase in supply, and demand will be appropriate, and we will not have inflation in the costs of healthcare. These are facts. This is how economics work. Economics are applied to all things because economics is all about how do you trade your time for benefit, right? What's the cost? What's the benefit? And folks, if we go to single payer, or the more we socialize, the more we reduce the supply, the harder we make it for doctors, the harder we make it for drugs to make drugs and produce drugs, the more they can get sued so that there's higher risks, so they have to amplify their profits. You know why drug companies are so obsessed with profits? Because they know that they're one class action lawsuit away from losing and going bankrupt. So therefore, they have to exploit profits as hard as they possibly can. If we have tort reform, we fix that, cost of drugs will come down as long as we increase or decrease the bureaucracy, the risk, the total costs that go in through the FDA, all of that. These are the solutions we need, folks. We do not need Bernie Sanders nonsense or Elizabeth Warren nonsense. They will break it more. We will have less options for higher cost at lower quality. Wake up, folks.